A struggling widow with children found her own framed memorial photo while cleaning the restaurant. Brianna Holloway wiped the sweat from her brow as she scrubbed the pristine floors of the Golden Spoon, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the small city of Millbrook, Connecticut. At 43, she never imagined she'd be working as a cleaner, but life had a way of throwing curveballs. As a single mother of two, she did what she had to do to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. Her arms ached as she polished the ornate mirror frames that adorned the restaurant's plush entryway. The glittering chandeliers above her head seemed to mock her with their opulence. Brianna sighed, thinking of her own modest apartment and the struggles she faced daily. As she moved to the next frame, something caught her eye. Among the various photographs of celebrity patrons and local dignitaries, there was a picture that made her heart skip a beat. The woman in the photo looked exactly like her, but younger, maybe in her early 20s. Brianna blinked, convinced her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. She leaned in closer, studying the image. The resemblance was uncanny. The same almond-shaped green eyes, the distinctive dimple on the left cheek, even the small scar above the right eyebrow that Brianna had gotten from a childhood accident. But it couldn't be her. Brianna had never set foot in this restaurant before taking this job 2 weeks ago. "Everything all right, Brianna?" The voice of her supervisor, Margot, snapped her out of her trance. "Oh yes," Brianna replied, quickly resuming her work. "Just making sure I didn't miss a spot." As she continued her shift, Brianna couldn't shake the image from her mind. Who was that woman? And why did she look so much like her? Little did she know this discovery would set in motion a series of events that would change her life forever. That night, as Brianna tucked her children into bed, 12-year-old Zoe and 9-year-old Ethan, she found herself lost in thought. The kids noticed their mother's distraction, but chalked it up to her exhaustion from work. "Mom, are you okay?" Zoe asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Brianna forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired from work. Now get some sleep, you have school tomorrow." After kissing her children goodnight, Brianna retreated to the small living room of their apartment. She sank into the worn couch, her mind racing. The image of the woman in the photograph haunted her. There had to be an explanation. As she sat there, memories of her childhood began to surface. Brianna had always felt like something was missing, like there was a void in her life she couldn't explain. Her parents had passed away when she was in her early 20s, and she'd never been particularly close to her extended family. But now, a nagging feeling told her there might be more to her family history than she knew. Brianna reached for her phone, her fingers hovering over the contact for her Aunt Vivian. It was late, but this couldn't wait. She needed answers. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Brianna, is everything all right?" "Aunt Vivian, I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to ask you something important," Brianna said, her voice trembling slightly. Is there something about my childhood that you've never told me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Aunt Vivian finally spoke, her voice was heavy with emotion. "Oh, Brianna, I always knew this day might come. There's something you need to know." Brianna's hand shook as she held the phone to her ear, her aunt's words washing over her like a tidal wave. "You have a twin sister, Brianna," Aunt Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your parents, they had to give her up for adoption when you were both 3 years old." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Brianna struggled to process this information. "A twin? But how? Why?" Aunt Vivian sighed heavily. "It was a difficult time for your parents. Your father had lost his job, and your mother was battling a severe illness. They could barely afford to care for one child, let alone 2. It broke their hearts, but they felt they had no choice." Tears streamed down Brianna's face as she listened to the story of her long-lost sister. She learned that her parents had agonized over the decision, ultimately choosing to keep Brianna because she had been born a few minutes earlier. The adoption had been closed, and they had never known what became of their other daughter. "Why didn't anyone ever tell me?" Brianna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your parents made us promise not to," Aunt Vivian explained. "They didn't want you to feel guilty or to spend your life wondering about a sister you might never meet. They planned to tell you when you were older, but then the accident—" Brianna nodded, remembering the car crash that had claimed her parents' lives when she was 22. So much left unsaid, so many secrets taken to the grave. As the conversation with her aunt drew to a close, Brianna's mind was reeling. She had a sister out there somewhere, a twin. Could it be the woman in the photograph at the restaurant? The resemblance was undeniable, but what were the odds? Sleep eluded Brianna that night as she tossed and turned, her mind filled with questions and possibilities. By the time her alarm clock rang, signaling the start of another day, she had made a decision. She would find out who the woman in the photograph was, no matter what it took. The next evening, Brianna arrived at the Golden Spoon earlier than usual for her shift. She made her way to the entryway, her heart pounding as she approached the wall of photographs. There it was, the image that had turned her world upside down. Pretending to dust the frame, Brianna leaned in close, searching for any clues. Her eyes widened as she noticed a small plaque beneath the photo. It read, Cassandra Beaumont, daughter of owners Richard and Eleanor Beaumont, 2004. Cassandra Beaumont. Could this be her long-lost sister? Admiring the family photos, Brianna jumped at the sound of the voice behind her. She turned to see Eleanor Beaumont, the elegant owner of the Golden Spoon, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Beaumont," Brianna stammered. "I was just cleaning." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied Brianna's face. For a moment, something akin to recognition flickered in her eyes, but it was gone so quickly that Brianna thought she might have imagined it. "No need to apologize," Eleanor said smoothly. "That's my daughter, Cassandra. The resemblance between you two is quite striking, isn't it?" Brianna's heart raced. This was her chance. "It is," she agreed, trying to keep her voice steady. "If you don't mind me asking, Mrs. Beaumont, is Cassandra around? I'd love to meet her." A shadow passed over Eleanor's face. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said softly. "Cassandra passed away 5 years ago." The words hit Brianna like a physical blow. Her sister, the twin she had just discovered she had, was gone. She felt a deep, aching loss for someone she had never even known. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Brianna managed to say, fighting back tears. Eleanor nodded, her eyes distant. "Thank you. If you'll excuse me." As Eleanor walked away, Brianna's mind was in turmoil. Her sister was gone, but she had a family, the Beaumonts. Should she tell them the truth? Would they even believe her? Before she could decide, a small voice piped up behind her. "Why are you looking at my mommy's picture?" Brianna turned to see a little girl, no more than 4 years old, staring up at her with curious eyes that were identical to her own. "Hello there," Brianna said, kneeling down to the child's level. "What's your name?" "I'm Lily," the little girl replied. "Are you friends with my mommy?" Brianna's heart clenched. This was her niece, Cassandra's daughter. "No, sweetie," she said gently, "but I think I might be related to her." As Lily's eyes widened with wonder, Brianna knew that her life would never be the same again. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and she was determined to piece together the puzzle of her past, for herself, for Cassandra, and for little Lily. The following days were a whirlwind for Brianna. She found herself torn between her newfound knowledge and the fear of disrupting lives, both her own and the Beaumonts. Every shift at the Golden Spoon became an exercise in restraint, as she fought the urge to blurt out the truth to Eleanor or Richard. Meanwhile, her relationship with little Lily blossomed. The child seemed drawn to Brianna, often seeking her out during her shifts. Brianna's heart swelled with love for this niece she never knew she had, even as guilt gnawed at her for keeping the truth from the Beaumonts. It was during one of these moments with Lily that everything came to a head. Brianna was polishing silverware in the kitchen when Lily snuck in, clutching a family photo album. "Look what I found," Lily exclaimed, proudly displaying the book. "It has pictures of Mommy when she was little." Brianna's hands trembled as she opened the album. There, on the very first page, was a photo that made her gasp. 2 identical toddlers, no more than 3 years old, smiled up at the camera. The caption read, "Cassandra and unknown twin, last photo before adoption, 1984. "Lily, where did you get this?" Brianna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was in Grandpa's study," Lily replied, oblivious to Brianna's shock. "He says I'm not supposed to go in there, but the door was open. What's going on here? Brianna whirled around to see Richard Beaumont standing in the doorway, his face a mask of confusion and anger. His eyes fell on the open photo album, and the color drained from his face. "Mr. Beaumont, I can explain," Brianna began, but Richard cut her off. "My office, now." His tone left no room for argument. As they walked to Richard's study, Brianna's mind raced. This was it, the moment of truth. She steeled herself for what was to come. Once inside the opulent office, Richard closed the door and turned to face Brianna. "Who are you?" he demanded. "And why do you look exactly like my daughter?" Brianna took a deep breath. "My name is Brianna Holloway, and I believe I'm Cassandra's twin sister." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard staggered back, gripping the edge of his desk for support. That's impossible," he muttered. "Is it?" Brianna countered gently. She explained everything. The photo she'd seen, her conversation with Aunt Vivian, the undeniable resemblance between her and Cassandra. As she spoke, Richard's demeanor changed. The anger melted away, replaced by a mix of wonder and sorrow. "We always knew Cassandra was adopted," he said softly, "but we had no idea she had a twin. Eleanor and I, we couldn't have children of our own. When we adopted Cassandra, it was like a miracle. We never questioned where she came from." Tears welled up in Brianna's eyes. "I'm not here to disrupt your lives," she assured him. I needed to know the truth, and now that I do, I don't know what to do with it." Richard was quiet for a long moment, lost in thought. Finally, he looked up at Brianna, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "We need to tell Eleanor," he said. "And then we need to talk about where we go from here." The conversation with Eleanor was emotional, to say the least. At first, she refused to believe it, accusing Brianna of trying to con them. But as the evidence mounted, the uncanny resemblance, the matching childhood photos, the timing of the adoption, Eleanor's defenses crumbled. "All these years," she whispered, reaching out to touch Brianna's face, "you've been out there, and we never knew." As the truth settled over the room, a new challenge presented itself. How would they explain this to Lily? And what about Brianna's own children? "I have 2 kids," Brianna said, her voice trembling. "Zoe and Ethan. They don't know any of this yet. And Lily, she's so young. How do we tell her that the woman she's been talking to is actually her aunt?" Richard and Eleanor exchanged a look. "We'll figure it out together," Richard said firmly. "You're family now, Brianna. We may have lost Cassandra, but in a way, we've found you." As Brianna left the Golden Spoon that night, her head was spinning. In the span of a few weeks, her world had been turned upside down. She had lost a sister she never knew she had, but gained a new family in the process. Driving home to her small apartment, Brianna felt a mix of emotions. Grief for the sister she'd never know, excitement for the future, and anxiety about how her children would react to this news. As she parked her car, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. Zoe and Ethan were waiting for her, curious about why she was later than usual. Brianna gathered them in the living room, her heart pounding. "Kids," she began, "there's something important I need to tell you. Our family, it's about to get a lot bigger." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions and adjustments for everyone involved. Brianna found herself straddling 2 worlds, her modest life with Zoe and Ethan, and the newfound connection with the wealthy Beaumont family. Zoe and Ethan's reactions to the news had been a mix of shock, excitement, and confusion. 12-year-old Zoe, always the more analytical of the two, had peppered Brianna with questions about genetics and family trees. 9-year-old Ethan, on the other hand, was simply thrilled at the prospect of having a new cousin to play with. Explaining the situation to Lily had been a more delicate matter. Richard and Eleanor had taken the lead, with Brianna present for support. They'd kept it simple, telling Lily that Brianna was her mommy's sister who had been lost for a long time but was now found. The little girl had taken the news with the innocence of childhood, immediately asking if this meant she could see Brianna more often. As the dust began to settle, Brianna found herself facing a new set of challenges. The stark contrast between her life and the Beaumonts became increasingly apparent. She continued to work at the Golden Spoon, but the dynamic had shifted. The other staff members whispered and stared, unsure how to treat the cleaner who was now related to the owners. One evening, as Brianna was finishing up her shift, Eleanor approached her with an offer that would change everything. "Brianna, dear," Eleanor began, her voice soft but firm. "Richard and I have been talking. We'd like to offer you a position as the assistant manager of the Golden Spoon." Brianna's jaw dropped. "But I don't have any experience in restaurant management," she protested weakly. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "You can learn. What's important is that you're family, and we want you to have a role here that reflects that." The offer was tempting. The salary would be significantly higher than what she was making as a cleaner, and it would allow her to provide a better life for Zoe and Ethan. But a part of Brianna hesitated. She didn't want charity, and she worried about how this would affect her relationships with her co-workers. "Can I think about it?" Brianna asked. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need." As Brianna drove home that night, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The offer from Eleanor was generous, almost too generous. It represented a chance at a better life for her and her children, but it also felt like a seismic shift in the careful balance she'd been maintaining between her two worlds. When she arrived home, she found Zoe and Ethan eagerly awaiting her return. They had been spending more time with the Beaumonts lately, and the influence was beginning to show. "Mom," Ethan exclaimed as soon as she walked through the door, "can we go to the country club with Grandpa Richard this weekend? He said he'd teach me how to play golf." Zoe rolled her eyes at her brother's excitement but couldn't hide her own interest, and Grandma Eleanor mentioned something about a debutante ball next month. She said I might be able to attend as a junior debutante. Brianna felt a pang of guilt mixed with a touch of resentment. The Beaumonts were offering her children opportunities she could never provide on her own. But at what cost? She worried about Zoe and Ethan losing touch with their roots, with the values she'd worked so hard to instill in them. "We'll see," she said non-committally, hanging up her coat. "How about we have dinner first and talk about our day?" As they sat around their small kitchen table, eating the simple pasta dish Brianna had quickly prepared, she couldn't help but compare it to the gourmet meals served at the Golden Spoon. The contrast was stark, and it made her question everything. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Brianna found herself sitting on the fire escape outside their apartment window, a place she often retreated to when she needed to think. The cool night air helped clear her head as she weighed her options. Taking the job at the Golden Spoon would mean a complete change in lifestyle. It would offer financial security and opportunities for her children she'd only dreamed of before. But it would also mean accepting help from the Beaumonts, something her pride rebelled against. She'd always prided herself on making it on her own, on teaching her kids the value of hard work and perseverance. On the other hand, refusing the offer might create a rift with the Beaumonts. They were her family now, connected by blood and shared loss. Pushing them away would mean denying Zoe and Ethan a chance to know their extended family, to understand a part of their heritage. As she sat there, wrestling with her decision, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from James, Cassandra's widower, whom she'd met a few times since the revelation of their connection. "Hey Brianna, hope I'm not texting too late. Just wanted to let you know how much it means to have you and the kids in our lives. Lily can't stop talking about her new cousins. Thank you for being so open to this crazy situation. Looking forward to our family dinner this weekend." The message brought tears to Brianna's eyes. In all her worrying about the financial and social implications of her new family connection, she'd almost lost sight of the most important thing, the human connection, the chance to be part of something bigger than herself. With a deep breath, Brianna made her decision. She would accept Eleanor's offer, but on her own terms. She would start as an apprentice manager, learning the ropes from the ground up. She would continue to live in their current apartment, at least for now, to keep her kids grounded. And she would make sure to have open, honest conversations with Zoe and Ethan about their changing circumstances. As she climbed back into the apartment, Brianna felt a sense of peace settle over her. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to embrace this new chapter in her life, with all its complexities and opportunities. Little did she know this decision would set in motion a series of events that would test her resolve, challenge her relationships, and ultimately lead to a revelation that would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about her family history. The following months were a whirlwind of change for Brianna and her children, True to her word, she started her apprenticeship at the Golden Spoon, spending long hours learning every aspect of the restaurant business. The work was challenging but rewarding, and Brianna found herself thriving in her new role. Zoe and Ethan too were adapting to their new circumstances. They still attended their old school, but their social circle had expanded to include the children of the Beaumont's friends. Brianna watched with a mixture of pride and concern as her kids navigated this new world of privilege, trying to ensure they didn't lose sight of the values she'd instilled in them. It was during a quiet Sunday afternoon, as Brianna was going through some old files in Richard's study, that she stumbled upon something that would change everything. Tucked away in a dusty folder labeled Cassandra Adoption, she found a letter that made her blood run cold. The letter was dated just a few months before Cassandra's death and was addressed to Richard and Eleanor. With shaking hands, Brianna began to read. "Dear Mom and Dad, I hope this letter finds you well. I've been doing some research into my birth family, and I've discovered something that I'm not sure how to process. I need your help and advice. I've found out that I have a twin sister. Her name is Brianna Holloway, and she lives right here in Millbrook. Can you believe it? All this time she's been so close. I'm torn about what to do. Part of me wants to reach out to her, to get to know the sister I never knew I had. But another part of me is scared. What if she doesn't want to know me? What if this disrupts the life we've built? I haven't told James about this yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Please, can we meet soon to discuss this? Love always, Cassandra." Brianna's mind reeled as she processed the implications of this letter. Cassandra had known about her. She had wanted to reach out, but something had stopped her. And now Cassandra was gone, taking with her the chance for them to have known each other as sisters. As she sat there, trying to make sense of this new information, Brianna heard a noise behind her. She turned to see Richard standing in the doorway, his face a mask of shock and guilt. "You weren't supposed to find that," he said quietly. Brianna stood up, anger and confusion warring within her. "You knew. All this time you knew about me." Richard sighed heavily, seeming to age years in a matter of moments. "We didn't know at first," he explained. "Cassandra discovered the truth on her own. She came to us just like the letter says. We advised her not to contact you." "Why?" Brianna demanded, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that?" "We were afraid," Richard admitted. "Afraid of losing her, afraid of disrupting the life we'd built. We told her to take some time, to think it through carefully before making any decisions, and then she died." Brianna finished for him, her heart breaking all over again. The silence that fell between them was heavy with unspoken words and missed opportunities. Brianna's mind was spinning, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she thought she knew. "Does Eleanor know about this?" she asked finally. Richard nodded. "Yes, she does. We've been carrying this guilt ever since you came into our lives. We didn't know how to tell you." Brianna sank back into the chair, overwhelmed by the weight of this revelation. She thought of all the time she'd lost, of the relationship she could have had with Cassandra if things had been different. "I need some time," she said quietly. "I need to process this." Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, take all the time you need, but please, Brianna, know that we never meant to hurt you. We made a mistake, and we've regretted it every day since." As Brianna left the Beaumont house that day, her world felt like it had been turned upside down once again. The family she'd come to know and love had been keeping this secret from her. The sister she'd never known had wanted to reach out to her. Driving home, Brianna's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at the Beaumonts for keeping this from her. Grief for the relationship she could have had with Cassandra. And a deep, aching sadness for all the missed opportunities. But as she pulled up to her apartment building, seeing Zoe and Ethan waiting for her on the steps, a new resolve began to form in her heart. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. She had a family now. A complex, imperfect family, and she was determined to make the most of it. Little did Brianna know, this revelation was just the beginning. The final chapter of her journey would bring one last surprise, one that would test the bonds of her newfound family and force her to confront the true meaning of forgiveness and love. The weeks following Brianna's discovery of Cassandra's letter were tense and emotionally charged. She found herself pulling away from the Beaumonts, unsure how to reconcile her feelings of betrayal with the genuine affection she'd developed for them. Zoe and Ethan, perceptive as always, sensed the shift in their mother's mood. "Mom, is everything okay with Grandma and Grandpa?" Zoe asked one evening as they sat around the dinner table. Brianna sighed, realizing she couldn't shield her children from the complexities of their family situation forever. "It's complicated, sweetheart," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes even adults make mistakes and hurt each other without meaning to." As she explained the situation in terms her children could understand, Brianna was surprised by their reactions. Instead of anger or confusion, both Zoe and Ethan showed a maturity beyond their years. "But Mom," Ethan said thoughtfully, "isn't family about forgiving each other and moving forward?" His words struck a chord in Brianna's heart. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. The next day, Brianna received an unexpected visitor at the Golden Spoon. James, Cassandra's widower, walked in just as she was closing up for the night. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, a nervous smile on his face. I needed to talk to you." Over cups of coffee in the empty restaurant, James poured out his heart. He had found Cassandra's research into her birth family after her death, but had been too grief-stricken to do anything about it. When Brianna had come into their lives, he had recognized her immediately, but hadn't known how to broach the subject. "I should have told you sooner," he admitted, his eyes filled with regret. I was scared of losing the last connection I had to Cassandra." As Brianna listened to James's story, she felt the last of her anger melting away. Everyone, the Beaumonts, James, even Cassandra, had been struggling with their own fears and insecurities. They were all human, all flawed, all trying their best in a complicated situation. "Thank you for telling me this," Brianna said softly, reaching out to squeeze James's hand. I think it's time we all sat down and had an honest conversation." The family meeting that followed was emotional and cathartic. Tears were shed, apologies were made, and slowly the healing began. Eleanor and Richard expressed their deep remorse for their past decisions, and Brianna found it in her heart to forgive them. As the dust settled, a new family dynamic began to emerge. Brianna, with her practical experience and fresh perspective, breathed new life into the Golden Spoon's management. Zoe and Ethan flourished in their expanded family circle, with Lily becoming like a little sister to them. James too became an integral part of their lives. As he and Brianna bonded over their shared love for Cassandra, a tentative romance began to blossom. It was slow and cautious, both of them mindful of their complex history, but it was built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. 1 year after Brianna's life-changing discovery at the Golden Spoon, the entire family gathered for a momentous occasion. The restaurant was closed for a private event, the unveiling of a new portrait to hang alongside Cassandra's. As Richard pulled away the covering, gasps of appreciation filled the room. The portrait showed Brianna and Cassandra side by side, their similarities striking, their differences celebrated. It was a testament to the sister Brianna had lost and the family she had found. "To Cassandra," Richard said, raising a glass, "to who brought us all together in ways we could never have imagined, and to new beginnings," Brianna added, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she looked around at her expanded family. As they all raised their glasses in a toast, Brianna felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been long and often painful, but it had led her here, to a place of love, acceptance, and belonging. Later that evening, as the family gathered for a group photo, Brianna found herself standing between James and Eleanor, with Zoe, Ethan, and Lily in front of them. Richard stood on Eleanor's other side, his arm around his wife's shoulders. As the photographer counted down, Brianna looked around at the faces of her family, the family she had always had, and the family she had found. In that moment, she knew that while the path had been unexpected, it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. The camera flashed, capturing the moment forever, a moment of new beginnings, of healing, and of a family bonded by love, loss, and the unbreakable ties of both blood and choice. As they dispersed, hugging and laughing, Brianna felt a warm hand slip into hers. She looked up to see James smiling down at her, his eyes full of promise for the future. "Ready for our next chapter?" he asked softly. Brianna squeezed his hand, her heart full. "More than ready," she replied. And as they walked out of the Golden Spoon together, surrounded by their family, Brianna knew that while her story had taken an unexpected turn, it was far from over. In fact, the best chapters were yet to be written.